She left everything behind that night: the house, the husband, the son who no longer recognized her. She carried only a bag and a heart that pounded like a cornered animal. She knocked on her neighbor's door, not knowing that behind it lay not just shelter, but the past that had wounded her most deeply. The man who, years ago, had rejected her when she needed him most. Now, alone under the same roof, amid secrets, silences, and a forbidden desire that threatens to destroy them both, she will have to face much more than her own shame. She'll have to decide how far she's willing to go for a love that never died. If intense and unexpected love stories like this touch your heart, subscribe to our channel and comment what you thought. Every day we post new plots that move and surprise. Discover now the romance that no one dared to live. On the night she finally left her wedding ring on the dresser, Sarah felt naked. For 20 years she had endured an oppressive marriage with David, a man obsessed with status, who fed on her submission and ignored her silences. In recent weeks, her skin could no longer bear his touch. Every word they exchanged sounded like a cold blade. When the door of the house closed behind her that night, Sarah experienced the vertigo of a precipice, fear and freedom in a single breath. The salty breeze from the ocean 2 blocks from her home in Malibu carried the jasmine scent from neighboring gardens, mixed with the smell of approaching rain. Sarah walked along the sidewalk, barefoot, feeling every irregularity beneath her feet, as if she were stepping into the world for the first time. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from a strange energy that had been running through her veins since she made the decision to leave. 20 years. 20 years pretending to be the perfect wife of David Reynolds, respected attorney, owner of a downtown office and an arrogance he wore like a well-tailored suit. 20 years smiling at his friends, serving whiskey at business dinners, silencing her voice when he interrupted her in front of others. 20 years sleeping next to a man who treated her like a beautiful trophy, but who never, not once, asked what she felt or desired. Sarah stopped in front of the wrought iron gate of the neighboring house, that imposing stone and shadow construction she had always avoided looking at directly. The colonial mansion was bathed in a golden half-light, only a few windows illuminated by a soft light that danced as if from candles. That's where Jack Torres lived, the man who kept, in a corner of her memory, the most passionate and cruel night of her youth. Her fingers gripped the gate's bars, and she remembered how it all began. She was 18, had just graduated from the Catholic boarding school where her father had kept her locked up since she was 12. It was a neighborhood party, the kind that happened in Liberty Square, with colorful flags and accordion-playing folk music. Sarah wore a light blue dress that her mother had bought especially for the occasion, her hair loose for the first time in years, feeling free and dangerous. That's when she saw him. Jack was 25 then, having just returned from a stint in Europe where he'd studied naval architecture. He was tall, dark-haired, with those deep eyes that seemed to hold ancient secrets. He wore a simple white shirt, but there was something in the way he moved, how he held his beer glass, how he smiled from the corner of his mouth, that made all the other girls at the party look at him. But Sarah was the one he chose. "Do you dance?" he asked, extending his hand. His voice was deep, a little hoarse, as if he had just woken up. Sarah didn't answer, just placed her hand in his and let herself be led to the middle of the square. They danced close together, in silence, as the music enveloped them. She could smell his cologne, woody with a touch of sea salt, and the heat that emanated from his body through his shirt. When the music stopped, he didn't let her go. He just whispered in her ear, "Come with me," and she went. They walked through the streets of Liberty District until they reached Ocean View, where the waves crashed furiously against the rocks. Jack led her to a dark staircase between 2 old houses, and it was there that he kissed her for the first time. It wasn't a timid or hesitant kiss. It was a kiss that devoured, that burned, that made Sarah understand for the first time why the nun spoke of the sin of the flesh as a force capable of destroying worlds. His hands traveled along the curves of her dress, exploring every line of the body she herself was still discovering. Sarah heard herself moan softly when he kissed her neck, when his fingers found the bare skin of her shoulders. She felt an urgency she couldn't name, a desire that made her want to tear off her own clothes, give herself completely to him right there, in the darkness of those stone steps. "You're beautiful," Jack murmured against her mouth. and Sarah believed that he saw in her much more than just a pretty face. She believed that he saw the woman she dreamed of being, free, desired, capable of setting the world on fire with her own passion. But then, without explanation, he pulled away from her. The movement was so abrupt that Sarah staggered, needing to lean against the wall. Jack ran his hands through his hair, breathing heavily, his gaze lost in some distant point over the sea. "I need to go," he said, his voice rough as if he had swallowed ground glass. "Jack, what?" "No," he interrupted her without looking at her. "Forget this. Forget tonight. Forget everything." And he disappeared into the early morning, leaving Sarah alone on that staircase with her wrinkled dress and broken heart. Feeling rejected and hurt, Sarah accepted David's persistent courtship that same week. David, who had always courted her from afar, who treated her like a fragile princess, who promised to take care of her forever. David, who represented security, stability, a predictable future. Sarah married him out of spite, but also out of fear. Fear of never feeling what she had felt with Jack. Fear of discovering that that night had been just a mistake, an illusion of an inexperienced young woman. Now, 20 years later, standing in front of Jack's house, Sarah felt the same trembling hands, the same racing heart. But she also felt something new, a courage that came from desperation, from the certainty that she could no longer continue living a life that wasn't hers. She rang the doorbell. The sound echoed for a few seconds before footsteps approached the door. Sarah heard the sound of the lock being opened, and then the door opened. Jack was there, and nothing about him seemed to have changed, although he was more marked by time. His shoulders still broad, his shirt unbuttoned to his chest, his stubble, his eyes that burned her inside without asking permission. There were some wrinkles around his eyes, gray strands in his dark beard, but his presence remained dense, magnetic, dangerous. For a moment, both remained motionless, as if time had stopped. Sarah felt the tension build between them, so palpable that she had to lean on the doorframe to avoid backing away. But Jack, without saying a word, just moved out of the way for her to enter. His house was exactly as she had imagined it would be. Dark wood dominated all the rooms, books scattered on shelves and tables, old nautical maps pasted on the walls. A woody perfume hung in the air, mixed with the smell of salt coming from the open window facing the sea. It was a masculine house, but welcoming, full of objects that told stories, terrestrial globes, nautical instruments, photographs of distant places. "Do you want—" Jack began, but his voice failed. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Do you want a glass of wine?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She watched him move around the house, noticing how he avoided looking directly at her, as if each meeting of eyes was too dangerous. He served her an Argentinian Malbec in a crystal glass, and when their fingers touched as he passed the glass, both recoiled as if they had received a shock. "You can stay in the guest room," said Jack, his voice carefully neutral. "It has its own bathroom, clean sheets. You can stay as long as you need." Sarah took a sip of the wine, feeling the warm liquid flow down her throat. "Thank you," she murmured. "No need to thank me." They remained silent, the weight of 20 years of unspoken words hanging between them. Sarah wanted to ask about that night, about why he had rejected her, about what happened afterward. But something in his posture, in the way he kept his fists clenched, prevented her from speaking. "I'll show you the room," Jack finally said. He led her down a hallway with walls covered in black and white photographs, images of the sea, of sailboats, of distant ports. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a wrought iron bed, an old wardrobe, and a window overlooking the backyard garden. "The bathroom is there," indicated Jack, pointing to a side door. "If you need anything." "Jack?" Sarah spoke his name for the first time in 20 years, and it was as if each syllable burned in her throat. He turned to her, finally looking into her eyes, and in that moment, Sarah saw that he still felt. She saw the pain, the desire, the longing he tried to hide. She saw that that night 20 years ago had been as real for him as it had been for her. "Good night," he said, his voice rough again, and he left, closing the door. Sarah was left alone in the room, listening to his footsteps moving away down the hall. When she was sure he was far away, she leaned against the door and let the tears flow. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, because for the first time in 20 years, she was exactly where she wanted to be, even if he didn't know it, even if she herself didn't know what she would do next. Outside, the sea roared against the rocks, and Sarah fell asleep cradled by that sound, feeling that for the first time in decades, her entire body throbbed with an almost feverish energy. She was alive again. Sarah woke to the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of waves breaking on the beach. For a moment, disoriented, she didn't remember where she was. Then reality came back like a wave. She was in Jack's house. She had left David. She had taken the first step toward the abyss that both terrified and attracted her. She got up from the bed, noticing that someone had left a clean towel on the chair and a navy blue silk robe hanging on the bathroom door. The fabric had his scent, woody, with that touch of sea salt that she remembered so well. She put the robe on over her nightgown and left the room, following the aroma of coffee. Jack was in the kitchen, his back to her, stirring something in a pan on the stove. He wore only faded jeans, his bare torso revealing defined muscles that time had not been able to erase. Sarah observed his broad back, the small scars that drew mysterious maps on his tanned skin, the way his muscles moved when he turned to get something from the counter. "Good morning," she said, her voice still husky from sleep. Jack turned, and Sarah saw his eyes quickly descend to the robe she was wearing before rising again to her face. There was something different in his gaze that morning, a vulnerability that hadn't existed the night before. "Good morning," he replied, turning back to the stove. "I made scrambled eggs. I hope you still like them." Sarah felt a tightness in her chest. He remembered. After 20 years, Jack still remembered that she loved scrambled eggs for breakfast. "I still do," she murmured, sitting at the solid wood table that dominated the kitchen. He served 2 plates and sat on the opposite side of the table, far enough away that they wouldn't accidentally touch. They ate in silence, but Sarah felt the weight of his gaze on her whenever she raised her eyes from the plate. "Jack," she began, finally gathering courage. "No," he interrupted her without raising his eyes. "We're not going to talk about this." "About what?" "About that night. About why you're here. About none of this." Sarah felt anger rise in her throat. "Then what are we going to talk about? The weather? The neighbors?" Jack finally looked at her, and there was a hardness in his eyes that she hadn't expected. "You can stay here as long as you need, but I won't pretend this is something it's not." "And what is it?" "Charity." The word hit her like a slap. Sarah rose from the table so abruptly that the chair toppled backward. "Charity?" she repeated, her voice trembling with indignation. "You think I came here asking for charity?" Jack also stood up, and Sarah realized how much bigger, more imposing he seemed when he was angry. "I don't know why you came here, Sarah. But I know it wasn't for me." "How can you know that?" "Because if it were for me, you would have come 20 years ago." The silence that followed was dense, loaded with grief and unspoken accusations. Sarah felt tears threaten, but she wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing her cry. "You're right," she said, her voice cold. "I didn't come here for you. I came because I had nowhere else to go." She saw something break in his gaze, a pain he immediately tried to hide. But Sarah had already seen it, and she hated herself for having hurt the only man she had never been able to forget. "Then it's settled," said Jack, his voice back to that neutral, controlled tone. "You stay in the guest room. I work from home, in the second-floor office. We have our separate lives." Sarah nodded, unable to speak. She watched him leave the kitchen, heard his footsteps going up the stairs, heard a door closing upstairs. Only then did she allow herself to cry. The following days were a silent game of cat and mouse. Jack seemed to observe her through the cracks, always present but distant, like a ghost inhabiting the same house. Sarah discovered that he left small proofs of care scattered throughout the house. An extra blanket when the night was cold, hot tea on the kitchen table when she woke up, a poetry book she had mentioned liking left on the living room table. On Monday, Sarah found a note stuck to the bedroom door. "There are clothes in your size in the wardrobe. Don't ask how I got them." When she opened the wardrobe, she found simple but elegant dresses, delicate lingerie, shoes that seemed to have been chosen specifically for her, all in her exact size, all in colors she loved. On Tuesday, it was a bouquet of jasmine left on the windowsill of the room. the same flowers she had worn in her hair on the night of the dance 20 years ago. On Wednesday, a handwritten poem on the kitchen table, unsigned. For 20 years, I've carried the weight of what I didn't say, the taste of what I didn't live, the pain of what I didn't allow. For 20 years, I've seen you in every woman who passes, in every night that fades, in every morning that is reborn. For 20 years, I've waited for the forgiveness I don't ask for the peace I don't deserve, for the love I don't forget. Sarah read the poem a dozen times, her fingers trembling over the paper. She wanted to go up to his office, knock on the door, demand explanations. But every time she gathered courage, she remembered the cold look he had given her in the kitchen, the word charity that still echoed in her mind. On Thursday, there were no gifts. Sarah felt the absence as a physical pain, wandering through the house like a ghost, waiting for a sign that didn't come. That's when she realized that Jack hadn't come down for meals either, that she hadn't seen him in 2 days. On Friday, worried, Sarah went up to the second floor for the first time since she had arrived. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by a window at the end that faced the sea. There were 3 doors, one open revealing a bathroom, another closed that must have been his bedroom, and a third ajar from which came the sound of computer keys. Sarah knocked lightly on the ajar door. "Jack?" The sound of the keys stopped. After a few seconds, his voice came from inside. "Come in." The office was a masculine sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, plants in pots scattered around the room, and a huge dark wooden desk where 2 monitors displayed 3D boat designs. Jack was sitting with his back to her, but Sarah could see the reflection of his face in one of the monitors. Bearded, tired, with deep dark circles. "You haven't been eating," she said. "I'm not hungry." "Jack, you need to." "What do you want, Sarah?" He turned in the chair, and she saw that he was even worse than she had imagined. His eyes were red, his skin pale, his hands trembling slightly. "I want to know why you're working yourself to death." "Because that's what I do. I design boats, I make money, I live my life." "That's not life, Jack. That's escape." He laughed bitterly. "Escape? You want to talk about escape? You who spent 20 years married to a man you didn't love, so you wouldn't have to face what you felt." Sarah felt the blood rush to her face. "You don't know anything about my marriage. I know enough. I know you were never happy with him. I know you stayed with me out of desperation, not love. And how can you know that?" Jack rose from the chair, and Sarah saw that he was wearing only shorts and a t-shirt, his feet bare. There was something wild about him, a desperate energy that both frightened and attracted her. "Because I know you, Sarah. I've always known you. Even after 20 years, I can still read every expression on your face, every movement of your body." He approached her, and Sarah felt her heart race. "Do you want to know why I rejected you that night?" Sarah nodded, unable to speak. "Because I loved you." The words came out as a harsh whisper. "I loved you so much it hurt. And I knew that if I touched you, if I made you mine, I would never be able to let you go. But you did let me go," murmured Sarah. "Because I had to. Because I wasn't good enough for you. Because I was just a poor kid from the suburbs. And you were a princess who deserved much more than I could offer." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. "I never asked you to decide for me." "No, you didn't ask. But I decided anyway. And I've regretted it every day since then." They were so close now that Sarah could feel the heat emanating from his body, could see the small scars on his tanned skin, could smell the cologne that made her dizzy. "Jack," she whispered. "No." He backed away, running his hands through his hair. "We're not going to do this again." "Do what?" "Pretend this can work. Pretend we're different people. Pretend the past doesn't matter." Sarah felt anger explode inside her. "You're a coward. I'm a realist." "You're a coward," she repeated, her voice louder. "You always have been. 20 years ago you were a coward. And now you're being a coward again." Jack turned to her, his eyes aflame. "You want me to be brave? You want me to tell you that I've spent 20 years dreaming of you? That all the women I had afterward had something of yours? The color of your eyes, the way you smile, the scent of your skin? That I bought this house because it's 2 blocks from yours just so I could feel that I was close to you?" Sarah was breathless. "Jack, you want me to be brave?" He approached her again. and this time he didn't back away. Then here it is. I still love you. I love you so much that I can't breathe properly since you stepped into this house. I love you so much that I'm afraid of going crazy. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a hesitant kiss like the first one, 20 years ago. It was a desperate, hungry kiss, loaded with 2 decades of longing. Sarah felt his hands grip her waist, pulling her closer, while his mouth devoured hers as if it were the last time. Sarah melted against him, her hands rising up his bare chest, feeling the muscles contract under her fingers. She moaned softly when he nibbled her lower lip, when his hands went up her back, tangling in her hair. I love you too, she murmured against his mouth. I never stopped loving you. Jack pressed her against the bookshelf, his body hard and hot against hers. Sarah arched her back when he kissed her neck, when his teeth found the sensitive spot behind her ear. She felt herself faint when his hands found the hem of her blouse, rising up the bare skin of her back. Sarah, he moaned against her skin. My God, Sarah. But then, as if waking from a trance, Jack abruptly pulled away. Sarah staggered, leaning on the shelf to avoid falling. No, he said, his breathing heavy. I can't do this to you. Why? Sarah approached him, but Jack backed away. Because you'll leave. Because you always leave. And I won't be able to survive if you leave me again. I won't leave. Yes, you will. Because deep down, Sarah, you know I'm right. You know this can't work. Sarah felt as if he had just ripped the heart from her chest. You're rejecting me again. I'm protecting you. From what? From me. And before she could respond, before she could process what he had just said, Jack left the office, leaving her alone among the books and nautical designs, with the taste of him still in her mouth and her heart broken once more. Outside, a storm was approaching, and Sarah could swear she heard the sea calling to her through the windows. The storm arrived in the early morning with a fury that made the windows tremble and the winds howl like wild creatures. Sarah woke up to the sound of lightning cutting through the sky, illuminating the room in white, ghostly flashes. The rain beat against the glass with such force that it seemed to want to break the house, come in and drag everything to the sea. She got up from the bed, still wearing the blouse and skirt she had worn in the confrontation with Jack hours before. His kiss still burned on her lips. His confession of love echoed in her mind like a mantra that she couldn't stop repeating. I still love you. The words had come out of his mouth like a desperate prayer, but afterwards he had retreated, once again building walls between them. Sarah descended the stairs in the dark, guided by the weak light coming from the kitchen. The entire house seemed to groan under the weight of the storm, the old wood creaking as if telling stories of other tempests, of other nights when the sea had tried to reclaim the land. In the kitchen, she found Jack sitting at the table, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hands. He wore only dark pajama pants, his bare torso illuminated by the candles he had spread around the room. His face was somber, lost in thoughts she couldn't decipher. Can't sleep? Asked Sarah, stopping at the door. Jack raised his eyes to her, and Sarah saw that he was different. There was a raw vulnerability in his gaze, as if the storm outside had awakened internal storms that he could no longer contain. I can never sleep when there's a storm, he said, his voice low. It reminds me of... He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah saw his hands tremble around the glass. Without asking permission, she approached and sat on the other side of the table. Reminds you of what? Jack took a sip of the whiskey, closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, there was an ancient pain there, so deep that Sarah felt the urge to extend her hand and touch him. Do you want to know why I really rejected you that night? He asked. Sarah nodded, her heart accelerating. It wasn't out of pride. It wasn't because I thought you deserved better. Jack rotated the glass in his hands, observing the golden liquid reflect the candlelight. It was because I had just killed someone. The silence that followed was so dense that Sarah could hear her own heart beating. What? Not literally killed, Jack hastened to clarify, but the pain in his voice was real. But it was my fault. That night, after I left the party, after I left you on that staircase, I went to the beach. I was confused, angry with myself for having hurt you. I was drinking, walking on the sand. Sarah leaned forward, catching every word. That's when I heard the screams. Jack closed his eyes again. A girl, Isabel. She had drunk too much at another party. had fought with her boyfriend and decided to take a dip in the sea to cool off. The waves were strong, dangerous. When I saw her, she was already being dragged away from the beach. "Jack, I went into the sea," he continued, his voice increasingly rough. "Swam to her, managed to reach her, but the currents were too strong, and she was in panic, thrashing, pushing me under. For a moment, I had to choose. It was her or me." Sarah felt a tear run down her face. She already knew how the story ended. I brought her to the beach, tried resuscitation, mouth to mouth, chest compressions, but it was too late. She had swallowed too much water, been without oxygen for too long. Jack opened his eyes and looked directly at Sarah. "She died in my arms, but you tried to save her. You did everything you could. It wasn't enough." Jack's voice broke. "And you know what I thought when she died? I thought that if I hadn't left the party, if I had stayed with you, if I hadn't gone to that beach, maybe I wouldn't have heard the screams. Maybe someone braver, stronger would have saved her." Sarah rose from her chair and went around the table, but Jack extended his hand to stop her. "No, you don't understand. I spent months after that wondering if I really tried everything, if I didn't give up too soon, if a part of me didn't want to die with her, because I felt guilty for having hurt you. Jack, you were in shock. You did what you could." "Did I?" He laughed bitterly. "Or did I save myself first?" That question tormented me for years, made me incapable of touching another woman without feeling her hands clutching at me, without hearing her screams echoing in my head. Sarah finally understood. The rejection, the distance, the way he looked at her as if she were something too precious to be touched. "You thought you didn't deserve love," she said softly. "I knew I didn't deserve it. And when you showed up at my door last week, I knew that nothing had changed. I'm still the same man who failed when it mattered most." "No." Sarah stood up again, and this time she didn't let him stop her. She walked over to him and held his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "You saved a life that night. Your own. Sarah, you punished yourself for 20 years for something that wasn't your fault. You condemned yourself to isolation because you thought you didn't deserve to be happy. But I'm here, Jack. I'm here because I choose you. Because I chose you that night 20 years ago, and I choose you now." Jack's eyes filled with tears. "You can't choose me. I'll disappoint you. I always disappoint the people I love." "Then disappoint me," said Sarah, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "Disappoint me 1,000 times, but don't abandon me again." Outside, lightning cut through the sky with such violence that the electric light in the house flickered and then went out completely. They were left only in candlelight, their faces illuminated by the golden dance of the flames. Jack rose slowly, Sarah's hands still on his face. For a moment, they stood like this, looking at each other, and Sarah could see the war being waged inside him. Desire fighting against fear, love fighting against guilt. "I'm afraid," he whispered. "So am I," admitted Sarah. "But I'm more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering, what if?" It was then that Jack finally surrendered. His hands rose to Sarah's face, his fingers tangling in her hair, and he kissed her with a passion that made her legs weaken. It was a kiss different from the others. Not just desire, but complete surrender, as if he were finally allowing her to see all his demons, all his scars. Sarah melted against him, her hands exploring his bare chest, feeling his heart beat out of rhythm under her fingers. When Jack began to kiss her neck, Sarah moaned softly, arching her back to get even closer. "Sarah," he murmured against her skin. "Are you sure?" "I've been sure for 20 years, she replied. Jack lifted her in his arms as if she weighed nothing, and Sarah felt like a teenager again, wrapping her legs around his waist. He carried her upstairs, stopping only to kiss her again in the middle of the way, pressing her against the hallway wall. His bedroom was masculine and welcoming, dominated by a huge dark wooden bed. The windows were open, letting in the sound of the rain and the smell of the sea. Jack placed her gently on the floor at the foot of the bed, his hands trembling slightly when he began to unbutton her blouse. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered," he said, his voice hoarse. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. At 42, after 20 years of a passionless marriage, she had forgotten what it was like to be desired this way. Jack looked at her as if she were a work of art, as if each inch of her skin were precious. When the blouse fell to the floor, Jack ran his fingers along her bare collarbones, slowly descending down her arms. Sarah shivered at his touch, feeling each nerve ending awaken. "Jack," she whispered, her hands rising up his chest. He kissed her again, this time more slowly, savoring. His hands explored the curves she had hidden for so long under conservative clothes and forced smiles. When his fingers found the clasp of her bra, Sarah held her breath. "We can stop," said Jack, noticing the hesitation. "If you're not ready." "No." Sarah held his hands. "Don't stop. Please, don't stop." The bra fell to the floor, and Jack stood motionless for a moment, just looking. Sarah felt the impulse to cover herself, to hide the marks that time had left. But there was such reverence in his gaze that she forced herself to stand still, allowing him to see her completely. "Perfect," murmured Jack, bending down to kiss the curve of her neck, slowly descending. "You're perfect." Sarah arched her back when his mouth found a breast, his tongue drawing circles that made her moan. There was so much care in his touches, so much adoration, that she felt tears in her eyes. This is how it should have been from the beginning. This is how making love should be, with someone who saw her as she really was, who loved her for it. When Jack pulled away to remove his own pants, Sarah took the opportunity to observe him. His body was still strong, marked by years of swimming and physical work. There were scars she didn't know, muscles that seemed sculpted by the life he had lived away from her. 20 years, he said, coming back to her, pulling her closer. 20 years dreaming of this moment. "Me too," admitted Sarah, letting him lay her on the bed with a gentleness that made her feel fragile and powerful at the same time. Jack lay down beside her, his hand tracing invisible patterns on her bare skin. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want you to remember this night forever." "I already will," replied Sarah, pulling him down. "Because it's you. Because it's always been you." Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the room, there were only the two of them, finally together, finally free to love without fear, without guilt, without the shadows of the past. When Jack finally made her his, when their bodies united after 20 years of longing, Sarah understood that some things were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth all the suffering they had gone through to get here. And as she moved with him in the ancient rhythm of love, as she lost herself in the low moans he whispered in her ear, Sarah knew she would never be the same again. They had found each other again, and this time, nothing and no one would be able to separate them. The storm could rage outside as much as it wanted. Inside that room, they had created their own refuge, their own peace. And for the first time in 20 years, both allowed themselves to believe they deserved to be happy. Sarah woke up wrapped in Jack's arms, the golden light of dawn filtering through the curtains and drawing soft patterns on the naked skin of both. For the first time in decades, she felt complete, as if each fragmented piece of her soul had finally found its place. Jack's body was relaxed against hers, his face serene in sleep, free from the shadows he carried when awake. She observed the small scars on his chest, the marks that told stories of a life lived intensely. One of them, right over his heart, seemed to have been made by a fishhook. Another, on his shoulder, resembled the bite of something wild. They were maps of adventures she didn't know, of years they had been apart, and Sarah felt a pang of sadness for the lost time. Jack stirred, slowly opening his eyes. When he saw Sarah watching him, a genuine smile spread across his face, the first true smile she had seen since arriving at his house. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice husky from sleep. "Good morning," replied Sarah, leaning in to kiss him lightly. The kiss deepened, Jack's hands once again exploring the curves he had rediscovered the night before. Sarah felt desire ignite again, more intense than before, as if each touch of his awakened her to sensations she didn't even know existed. But before they could lose themselves in each other again, the sound of the doorbell echoed through the house, insistent and threatening. Jack stiffened in her arms. Who could it be at this hour? Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. There was only one person who would have the audacity to show up there at that time, only one person who knew her habits well enough to know where to find her. "David," she whispered. The doorbell rang again, longer, more impatient. Jack got out of bed, quickly putting on a pair of jeans. Sarah could see tension accumulating in the muscles of his back. the subtle change in posture indicating that he was preparing for a battle. "Stay here," he said without looking back. "No." Sarah got up too, looking for her clothes scattered on the floor. "He's my problem. I'll resolve this." "Sarah." "Jack, I spent 20 years letting other men decide what was best for me. I'm not going to start again now." He turned to her, and Sarah saw the internal struggle in his eyes, the instinct to protect her versus respect for her independence. Finally, he nodded. "Then let's resolve this together." They went down the stairs side by side, Sarah wearing the navy blue robe that Jack had left for her on the first day, he with a white t-shirt that accentuated his chest muscles. The doorbell rang a third time, followed by impatient knocks on the door. When Jack opened the door, David was there, but not alone. He had brought two men in suits, lawyers by the look of them, and a middle-aged woman whom Sarah recognized as Linda, the secretary from the law firm. David was exactly as Sarah remembered. Tall, well-dressed, with that arrogant posture she had mistaken for confidence when she was young. The gray suit was impeccable even in the rainy morning, his graying hair combed back, his face marked by wrinkles of bitterness that deepened when he saw Sarah coming down the stairs. "Sarah." His voice was cold, controlled, but Sarah could see the contained fury in his eyes. "It's time for you to stop this madness and come back home." "This is my home now," replied Sarah, stopping next to Jack. David laughed, a humorless sound. "Your home? You think you can simply abandon 20 years of marriage and come play house with this sailor?" Sarah felt Jack stiffen beside her, but he said nothing. He was waiting for her to take the lead, as he had promised. "I'm not playing at anything, David. I'm living my life for the first time in 2 decades. "Living your life?" David took a step inside the house, completely ignoring Jack. "You're having a breakdown, Sarah. A midlife crisis."
"It's perfectly understandable considering the pressure you've been under." "What pressure?" Sarah interrupted. "The pressure of being an adequate wife, of keeping up appearances. I understand that sometimes women your age go through these phases, but this has lasted long enough." Sarah felt anger explode inside her like a volcano that had been dormant for years. "Phases? You think freeing myself from a loveless marriage is a phase? You're being dramatic."
"Our marriage always worked perfectly. For you, David. It worked perfectly for you." One of the lawyers approached, opening a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Reynolds, my client is prepared to be generous. He won't ask for the return of the jewelry, the cars, the joint account. All you need to do is sign these papers and return home." Sarah looked at the documents without touching them. "What papers are these?" "A pre-divorce agreement," explained the lawyer. "Your husband agrees not to sue you for abandonment of the home if you agree to return and seek appropriate psychiatric treatment." "Psychiatric treatment?" Sarah looked at David, incredulous. "You want to have me committed?" "I want to help you, Sarah. You clearly aren't thinking clearly. Anyone can see that." That's when Jack finally spoke. His voice was low but carried an authority that made everyone turn to him. "Get out of my house." David ignored him, keeping his eyes on Sarah. "Do you really want to throw away our whole life for an adolescent adventure? Think about what you're doing, Sarah. Think about your reputation, my career. Think about how this will look to our friends." "Our friends?" Sarah laughed, and there was a joyful madness in the sound. "What friends, David? Those lawyers and executives who barely know my name? Those wives who talk about recipes and gardening because they aren't allowed to have opinions about anything else? You're talking like a crazy woman." "No." Sarah's voice became firmer. "I'm talking like a free woman for the first time in my life." David turned to Jack, finally acknowledging his presence. "And you? What do you have to say about this? Do you really think you can give her what I can? A beach house, a new car every year? Financial security?" Jack smiled, and there was something dangerous in that smile. "I can give her something you never gave." "And what would that be?" "Respect." The word hung in the air like an accusation. David went pale, his hands closing into fists. "You don't know me," said David, his voice low and threatening. "I know men like you," replied Jack calmly. "Men who confuse possession with love, control with care. Men who think women are trophies to be displayed, not people to be loved." David took a step toward Jack, but the second lawyer held him by the arm. "Mr. Reynolds, perhaps it would be better." "No." David broke free. "I will not allow this." this second-rate boat builder to insult me in front of my wife. Ex-wife, corrected Sarah. David turned to her, and Sarah saw something break in his gaze. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Sarah, please. We can resolve this. We can do couples therapy. We can travel. Have a second honeymoon. I can change. You can't change, David. And I don't want you to change. I just want you to let me go. I can't do that. You have no choice. That's when David showed his true colors. His face transformed, losing any pretense of civility. You think you're very clever, don't you? You think you can just leave home and start a new life? I will destroy you, Sarah. I will make you regret having been born. Sarah felt Jack move beside her, but she raised her hand to stop him. How? She asked, her voice surprisingly calm. I know about your father. The blood froze in Sarah's veins. What did you say? I know about the gambling debts he left, about the money you borrowed from my office to pay them off, money that was technically stolen from client funds. Sarah felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. It was true. 5 years after the wedding, when her father died, he had left enormous debts with loan sharks. Sarah, desperate, had used her power of attorney at David's office to temporarily transfer money with the intention of returning it as soon as she sold her father's house. David had found out, but at the time said it wasn't a problem, that he would cover the difference. You said it was okay, whispered Sarah. And it was, as long as you were an obedient wife. But now, David smiled cruelly. Embezzlement is a federal crime, Sarah. You could get 5 years in prison. You're blackmailing your own wife? Jack's voice was loaded with contempt. Ex-wife, David corrected with sarcasm. And I'm protecting my interests. Sarah, you have 24 hours to come back home and sign this agreement, or I'm going to the police. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Sarah's laughter. It wasn't a hysterical or desperate laugh. It was a laugh of pure amusement. You really think I'm afraid of you? She asked. You should be. Sarah approached David, and he instinctively backed away. I spent 20 years afraid, David. Afraid of disappointing you. Afraid of not being good enough. Afraid of losing the security you offered. But you know what I discovered? She stopped right in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. I discovered that a life in fear is not a real life. So do what you want. Call the police. Sue me. Send me to prison. Even so, I'd prefer 5 years in jail than 1 more day married to you. David was dumbfounded. It was clear that he expected her to bend, to crawl back. The Sarah he knew would have done exactly that. But this was no longer the Sarah he knew. You're crazy, he murmured. No, said Sarah, smiling. I'm free. That's when Jack approached, taking something from his pocket. It was a thick yellow envelope. Before you leave, he said calmly, you might want to take a look at this. David looked suspiciously at the envelope. What is this? Copies of emails, bank statements, phone conversation recordings. Documents that show how you've been diverting money from client funds for years. How you forged Sarah's signature on those transfers. How you invented debts that didn't exist to blackmail your own wife. David's face turned white as paper. That's a lie. Is it? Jack smiled. You forgot that I designed boats for some of your richest clients, including Mr. Harrison, who was very interested when I told him about the irregularities in his account. David looked at the lawyers, but both were already backing toward the door. Mr. Reynolds, said one of them, his voice tense, we cannot represent you if there is evidence of— Get out, said David through clenched teeth. All of you get out. When they were alone, David turned to Sarah one last time. You're really going to do this? Destroy everything we built? We didn't build anything, David. You built a prison and locked me inside it. Now I've found the key. David looked at Jack with pure hatred. This isn't over. Yes, said Jack calmly. It is. After David left, slamming the door hard, Sarah collapsed in a chair, trembling. Jack knelt beside her, holding her hands. Are you okay? Sarah searched for the right words. I'm terrified and relieved, and more afraid than I've ever been in my life, and happier too. Jack laughed, kissing her hands. That sounds right. How did you get those documents? I didn't, but David didn't need to know that. Jack smiled mischievously. He has guilt about so many things that he assumed I knew about some of them. Sarah looked at him admiringly. You were bluffing? Completely. But it was worth it to see his face. Sarah threw herself into Jack's arms, laughing and crying at the same time. I love you, she said against his chest. I love you so much I can't breathe. I love you too, replied Jack, holding her close. And this time, I won't let fear drive me away from you. 6 months later, Sarah was on the beach behind the house, watching Jack work on his newest project, a boat he was building for them to sail together. The divorce had been finalized without major problems. David, fearing that Jack really had evidence against him, accepted an agreement that left Sarah with half the assets and her complete freedom. Sarah had started teaching literature at a local school, rediscovered her passion for writing, made new friends who knew her as she really was. For the first time in her life, she felt she was living her own story, not playing a role in someone else's. It's almost ready, shouted Jack from the improvised workshop. Sarah smiled, walking over to him. The boat was beautiful, small, elegant, perfect for two people who wanted to explore the world together. What are you going to call it? She asked. Jack pulled her into his arms, kissing her slowly. Sarah, he said against her lips. I'm going to call it Sarah, because just like you, it will take me to places I never dreamed I could go. And as the sun set over the sea, painting the sky gold and pink, Sarah knew she had chosen correctly. She had chosen love over security, passion over convenience, freedom over a golden prison. She had chosen Jack, and he had chosen her. And this time, nothing and no one would be able to separate them, because they had learned that true love isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose every day, even when it's difficult, even when it's scary, even when the whole world is against you, and they would keep choosing each other forever.